The night air was cool, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and distant pine. Above, the moon hung low, a pale, watchful eye gazing over the ridges of northern China. The stars shimmered faintly, as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath. Beneath that silver sky, the first steps toward a dream were unfolding. The emperor's command had traveled far across mountains, rivers, and deserts, a voice carried by messengers on swift horses, each word heavy with purpose. "A wall shall rise," it declared. "A wall to guard the heart of the empire." It was not a command born of vanity, but of necessity, for the lands beyond the northern plains were restless, and danger moved under its own moonlit skies. On this night, a handful of chosen laborers and soldiers stood in the shadow of an unmarked ridge. They were here to begin what no one could yet fully imagine, the first foundation stone of a wall that would stretch further than a man's lifetime could measure. Lanterns flickered among them, casting small islands of gold against the dark. Each flame swayed gently in the breeze, illuminating tired but determined faces. The imperial foreman, a man with a voice deep as a temple bell, stepped forward. His hand rested on the first block of stone, a rectangular slab cut from the nearby hills. "Here," he said, his voice low, "the wall is born." The workers listened, the night wind tugging at their sleeves. Around them, the earth smelled freshly turned, damp with the labor of earlier digging. Shovels and picks had already shaped the shallow trench that would cradle the stone. Torches hissed softly as the resin inside them burned. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called, its echo fading into the valleys. The workers moved carefully, their footsteps muffled by packed soil. For men bent to the stone, their bodies tense with the weight. Slowly, they carried it to the waiting trench, each step steady, synchronized, as though guided by the heartbeat of the night itself. The foreman signaled, and the men lowered the stone into place. It settled with a deep, satisfying thud, the kind of sound that seemed to travel into the ground, a note that would remain long after the night was gone. For a brief moment, everyone was silent. Soldiers stood with their spears planted in the earth, watching. Laborers leaned on their tools. Even the wind seemed to pause. "This stone," the foreman murmured, "is not just for us. It is for our sons, and their sons, and theirs after them. Long after our names are gone, the wall will remain." One by one, the workers brought more stones forward. The first row began to take shape, uneven and raw, yet already alive with purpose. Lantern light slid across the surfaces, revealing grooves cut by chisel and hammer. The stone was still cool from the mountain quarry, carrying with it the memory of shadowed cliffs. Nearby, the emperor's envoy observed in silence, the wax seal of authority still tied to his robe. He would leave at first light, carrying news back to the capital, that the wall had begun, under a moon so bright it seemed a blessing. The night went on, slow and deliberate. The rhythm of work was gentle here at the beginning, no frantic pace, no shouting. Only the soft scrape of stone against stone, the muted clink of tools, and the hushed voices of men sharing brief words to pass the time. Overhead, the moon moved higher, silvering the ridge where the wall would one day stand tall and unbroken. When the final stone of that night's work was laid, the foreman ordered the lanterns to be lowered. Shadows grew longer as the light dimmed, and the workers stood in quiet rows, gazing at what they had made. It was a small thing still, just a handful of stones resting in the earth, but they felt its weight in their hearts. The wall's first breath had been drawn. And somewhere, far away in the palace, the emperor slept beneath the same moon, dreaming of a wall that would guard his people for all eternity. The sun had long vanished beyond the western hills, leaving behind a pale orange memory in the sky. As the first stars began to emerge, the camp stirred to life. By day, the construction site was a place of noise and heat, men shouting over the clang of tools, the heavy thud of stones striking earth, the braying of donkeys hauling carts. But at night, the sound softened, replaced by a different rhythm. One by one, lanterns were lit. Thin paper walls glowed from within, each flame a trembling heart in the dark. They hung from poles, stood on tables, and were carried in careful hands. The air filled with the faint smell of heated oil. Against the dust-streaked faces of the workers, the light made warm halos, softening the hard edges of exhaustion. In the center of the camp, the cooks prepared the evening meal. Iron pots simmered over low fires, steam curling upward like ghostly silk. The scent of rice mingled with chopped scallions, and from one corner, the sharp aroma of garlic roasting drifted through the air. Men gathered in small circles to eat, crouching low to the ground, bowls cradled in their hands. Conversation rose and fell in gentle tones, voices softened by the night. The dust of the day still clung to everything, to robes, to the folds of tents, to the rough fabric of bedrolls stacked neatly in corners. When the lantern light shifted with the wind, the dust caught it and glittered faintly, turning the air into a haze of gold. Children of some laborers played quietly near the edges of the camp. A boy rolled a small carved wheel along the dirt path, its shadow stretching long beside him. Two girls braided each other's hair, their fingers moving in the slow patience of the evening. From the guard stations on the hill, the deep calls of sentries echoed down, a reminder that though the night seemed calm, it was never truly without watchfulness. Musicians sometimes traveled with the work crews, and tonight, one sat cross-legged by the fire, plucking the strings of a pipa. The melody drifted lazily over the tents, wrapping around the men like a lullaby. A few hummed along under their breath, letting the tune carry them to thoughts of home. At the edge of the camp, the road from the southern provinces lay quiet. Yet the faint creak of wheels could already be heard. The supply caravan was drawing near, its approach heralded by the soft chime of a mule's harness bell. Workers lifted their lanterns high, the golden light swaying in greeting. Some men would sleep soon, their shift beginning again in the cool hours before dawn. Others would walk toward the half-built ridge, carrying timber and stone, their way lit by the flicker of camp lanterns that would burn until the first light of morning. Above it all, the moon climbed higher, its pale face gazing down on a sea of glowing lights in the dust. A constellation on the earth, as if the sky itself had fallen to rest in the heart of the camp. The first sound was always the bells. Soft and distant at first, they came drifting over the plain like a memory, the slow, rhythmic chime of bronze harness ornaments swaying with the movement of tired animals. Then came the faint crunch of wheels over dry soil, each turn raising a whisper of dust that caught the moonlight. By the time the caravan crested the last low hill, the workers at camp had already gathered to watch. Lanterns swung gently in the night breeze, their golden halos pooling on the ground, guiding the wagons toward the heart of the site. The moon hung low and heavy, a silver coin pressed into the dark, and it lit the winding path where the caravan descended. The first cart appeared, pulled by a pair of mules whose coats shone like polished stone. Their breath steamed in the cool air, and leather straps creaked under the weight of their load. Behind them came more, a slow, unbroken line of wagons, each bearing something different. Great square blocks of quarried granite, bundles of timber bound tight with hemp rope, baskets of iron nails and tools, jars of oil for the lanterns. Every item had traveled far, some from the deep mountains, others from the fertile valleys. Voices began to rise as the drivers called to their animals, urging them forward. The scent of the journey clung to them, earth, sweat, hay, and the faint bitterness of river water that had sloshed in wooden barrels along the way. The guards who had marched beside the caravan strode stiffly into the light, their armor dulled from the road, spears planted upright against the night sky. Children ran forward first, their bare feet kicking up little clouds of dust. They knew the caravan often brought small things from home, a scrap of cloth, a pouch of dried fruit, a new knife carved by a familiar hand. Laborers followed more slowly, stretching aching backs, squinting to see what the wagons carried this time. At the camp's edge, the foreman stepped forward to meet the lead driver. They exchanged brief words, nodding toward the construction ridge where the wall rose in its unfinished form. Men began to unload the supplies, the air soon filled with the dull thud of stone blocks set down in piles, the hiss of ropes slipping free, the scrape of timber sliding onto the ground. A few drivers lit small braziers at the edge of the camp to keep the cold away. Their orange glow mingled with the lantern light, and sparks rose like fireflies into the night. The mules were led to troughs where cool water waited, their long ears flicking in relief. One wagon, smaller than the rest, carried messages, scrolls tied with silk thread. These were delivered to the scribes, who set themselves down by the fire to read them aloud for the workers who could not read. News of distant towns, births, deaths, the price of rice, rumors of northern raiders. All passed from mouth to mouth until every ear in the camp had heard. When the last wagon rolled into its place and the nights unlow. The night air carried a dry coolness, the kind that settled into the bones without warning. Above, the sky was wide and empty except for a low sweep of stars, and beneath it the earthwork stretched like a sleeping serpent, dark, ridged, and silent. It began with the crunch of sandals on packed dirt. At first, only a few pairs of feet, then more, until the sound grew into a steady, unbroken rhythm. The workers were moving. Lanterns bobbed in the darkness, their light catching on faces half hidden in the shadow of conical hats. Each figure walked with the slow, even gait of someone who knew the path well, a path carved not just into the ground but into memory. The earthworks were uneven, a mixture of freshly raised mounds and half-dug trenches where the wall's foundation would rest. Here and there, piles of stone waited like silent witnesses, their sharp edges dulled under a thin layer of dust. The workers picked their way carefully, balancing wooden poles across their shoulders, baskets of gravel or clay hanging at either end. The sound of movement was constant, the soft pad of bare feet, the muted clink of stone against stone, the sigh of breath drawn in and let out in unison. It was a sound that spoke of years of repetition, of muscle learning what the mind no longer needed to think about. Occasionally, a voice would break the night, a warning of uneven ground, a muttered encouragement, a brief laugh when someone stumbled and caught themselves. These small human noises disappeared quickly into the open air, leaving the quiet to settle again. Some walked in single file along narrow ridges, their silhouettes etched black against the silver wash of moonlight. Others moved in pairs, speaking softly as they hauled beams toward the higher ground where construction had paused the previous night. At the far end of the earthworks, a section of wall rose to knee-height, its stones rough and unfinished. Here, a foreman stood waiting, lantern in one hand, tally stick in the other. Each load was counted, each man or woman given a nod before turning back for another trip. The pace was steady but unrelenting, every moment of the cool night had to be used before the sun returned and made the work unbearable. As the hours passed, a thin mist began to gather in the low hollows between mounds. It wrapped around ankles and drifted like smoke, softening the lines of the workers until they seemed like shadows themselves. The lanterns glowed dimly through it, little suns in a world of silver gray. From time to time, the workers would pause at a water jar placed along the path, dipping ladles into the cool, earthen scent of fresh well water. The break was brief, no more than a swallow or two, before they moved again. Footsteps tracing the same route over and over, wearing the earth smooth beneath them. By midnight, the night sky had deepened, the stars sharpening like points of cold light. The wall in progress loomed higher in places, marked by the faint. The towers rose in silence against the night, their shapes black and solemn against the pale shimmer of moonlight. They stood at intervals along the unfinished stretch of the great wall, not yet the grand watchtowers they would become, but skeletal frames of timber and stone, their edges sharp in the still air. At the base of one such tower, a small fire burned in a pit, its glow spilling across the packed earth. Two guards stood nearby, their armor catching faint reflections in shifting orange light. Their spears rested close at hand, though neither man seemed tense. The danger tonight lay not in battle, but in the vastness of the steppe beyond, in the uncertainty hidden in the dark. High above, another pair of sentries paced the wooden platform, their movements careful, deliberate. The wind tugged at the hems of their cloaks, bringing with it the faint scent of pine smoke from far-off camps and the sharper, colder air that rolled down from the hills. One paused to gaze into the distance, the other leaned over the railing to peer at the laborers below, lanterns swaying as they worked the wall's edge. Farther along the ridge, more towers dotted the night, each one marked by a flicker of fire, not enough to reveal their full shape, but just enough for one tower to see the next. These guide flames were the lifeblood of the wall at night, a chain of light and human vigilance that stretched into the dark, carrying silent messages through the vast distances. Occasionally, the quiet was broken by the low thump of a drum, a signal between towers. The sound rolled across the hills like distant thunder, steady and slow, meant not to alarm but to remind those who heard it, the wall is watched. From the tower's height, the land spread in muted tones, to one side, the earthworks and half-finished wall, to the other, the open plains where the shadows could hide anything, a wandering trader, a stray herd of animals, or an enemy scout. The guards knew that most nights would bring nothing, but still they looked. Always they looked. Below, a messenger approached the base of the tower, his lamp swinging as he walked. The guard on duty stepped forward, took the folded slip of bamboo from the messenger's hand, and passed it up to the watch above. Orders, perhaps, or a note of changes in the work schedule, even the simplest of messages carried weight here, where distance made every word precious. As the night deepened, the fires at the towers burned lower, their embers glowing like the eyes of patient beasts. The watchmen adjusted their cloaks, stamped their feet against the chill, and kept scanning the darkness. From this height, the workers on the wall below looked like ants tracing lines across the earth. Their lanterns flickered, dimmed by the wind, but always rose again. The watchmen did not speak much, but they knew that as long as those lights moved, the wall lived, even in the hours when the rest of the empire slept. Somewhere beyond the hills. The wall was never truly silent, not even in the deepest hours of the night. Yet here, in a small hollow sheltered from the wind, the sound was not of voices or heavy footfalls, but of stone meeting steel, a slow, careful rhythm, like the ticking of an ancient clock. A mason knelt in the dim light of a lantern, his hand steady as he guided the chisel along the face of a granite block. Each strike was soft, measured, as though he feared to wake something slumbering within the stone itself. Dust gathered on his sleeves and clung to the folds of his robe, but he did not notice. His world, for now, was only the stone before him. Nearby, another mason worked in silence, his lantern set low to avoid casting shadows across his hands. Their tools were simple, hammer, chisel, wedge, but the skill was in the patience, in the understanding that each imperfection in the stone would one day ripple along the wall itself. This was not a task to be rushed. The night air was cool here, carrying with it the faint scent of pine resin from torches burning higher on the ridge. Occasionally, the wind would slip through the hollow and brush the mason's face, tugging at his hair and scattering the thin veil of stone dust at his feet. He would pause for a heartbeat, then resume his work, as though the stone had been waiting for that exact moment to be shaped. Every so often, a quiet murmur would pass between the masons, a question about the fit of a block, or the line of the wall's edge. Their voices were low and warm, carrying a kind of familiarity that came from working side by side for many seasons. They did not need to speak often, the rhythm of their tools was its own conversation. Far above them, the sky opened wide, stars scattered like grains of salt over black silk. The moon hung low and pale, its light soft enough not to blind the eyes, but bright enough to turn the dust in the air into a faint silver mist. The mason's chisel paused again as he lifted the block slightly, checking the angle, feeling the weight. In the distance, a guard's signal fire flickered, its light wavering against the horizon. He adjusted the stone by the smallest of degrees, then set it down with a sound like a muted heartbeat. Somewhere beyond the wall, a night bird called once, twice, then fell silent. The masons worked on. Their hands were rough, their knuckles scarred, but they moved with a craftsman's grace, each blow of the chisel as deliberate as the breath that followed it. To an outsider, the night's progress might have seemed slow, almost invisible. But to the masons, each chip, each edge smoothed under lantern light, was a step toward something vast, a wall that would stand for generations, built stone by stone, whisper by whisper. And so the work continued, the sound of metal against stone mingling with the sigh of the wind, weaving itself into the quiet song of the night. The forest trail lay in darkness, its winding path lit only by the flicker of oil lanterns swinging from wooden poles. The air was damp, carrying the scent of wet earth and resin from freshly cut pine. Somewhere far off, the murmur of night insects hummed softly, but here, among the trees, the dominant sound was the steady creak of wood under strain. A team of laborers emerged from the gloom, their silhouettes broad against the faint glow. On their shoulders rested the heavy timbers, thick beams of pine and cedar, stripped of bark and smoothed for the wall's framework. The men moved in unison, each step measured to keep the weight balanced. The path was uneven, littered with roots and stones, but the night was cool, a blessing for such a burden. In the daytime, the sun would have pressed heat into their backs until sweat blinded their eyes. Here, beneath the moon's pale gaze, their breaths misted into the air, each exhale disappearing like a sigh. The leader of the group carried no timber himself but walked beside them, a staff in hand to prod the ground ahead for hidden dips or soft mud. His lantern swung low, throwing long, swaying shadows across the trunks of ancient pines. Occasionally, he would call out a warning, his voice low but clear, and the group would shift slightly, adjusting their grip. At intervals, they would stop, lowering the beams to rest on stumps or rocks. Hands would rub at aching shoulders, and someone might take a swallow from a leather water skin. They did not linger long, the wall's progress waited for no man, but these small pauses were moments of quiet camaraderie. A sudden gust rattled the branches overhead, sending a rain of dry needles to the ground. The scent of sap grew sharper, almost sweet. Somewhere above, an owl hooted, its wings beating soundlessly as it vanished deeper into the trees. The timber path wound upward now, following the rise of the land toward the ridge where the wall was taking shape. The men leaned into the climb, feet finding purchase on the rough track. The creak of the beams grew louder, the ropes binding them groaning under the strain. At the final bend, the forest broke open, revealing the construction site, a scatter of lanterns like tiny earthbound stars, workers moving among them like shadows. The sound of chisels and mallets reached the timber carriers, distant yet steady, as if the very night was keeping time with the labor. The men set the beams down beside a pile of stone blocks, and for a brief moment, they stood together, looking out over the valley below. The moonlight spilled over the landscape, catching the silver thread of the river and the black shapes of distant hills. None spoke, but each understood the weight of their work. Not just the physical load, but the knowledge that these timbers would hold the heart of the wall for decades, perhaps centuries. Then, without ceremony, they turned back to the path, vanishing once more into the forest shadows, ready to be. The ridge rose like a dark spine against the silver sweep of the night sky. Lantern light glimmered here and there along its length, tiny beacons that marked the slow but steady progress of the wall. Beneath the moon's cold gaze, the laborers appeared as moving shadows, elongated forms that swayed and shifted as they worked, their figures etched in black against the pale dust of stone. From a distance, they seemed almost like spirits, silhouettes climbing the hills, carrying burdens that gleamed faintly in the starlight. The night air was crisp here, thinner than in the valley, and each breath left a faint ghost of vapor. Some worked at the very edge of the ridge, where the wall's foundations met the steep drop into the valley. Their hammers rose and fell in slow rhythm, the sound muted by distance, absorbed into the night's stillness. Others passed along bundles of tools, baskets of mortar, or lengths of timber, their shapes bending and straightening in a patient choreography. The ridge wind moved constantly, carrying with it the faint tang of stone dust and the resin-sweet scent of freshly cut wood. It teased at the workers' sleeves and hair, and occasionally caught the flame of a lantern, making it flicker wildly before calming again. From below, the wall looked like a line of shadowed teeth biting into the mountain. The workers atop it looked no larger than ants, yet their movements were purposeful, unwavering. Every step they took, every rock they set in place, pushed the great work forward into being. Near the highest point of the ridge, a small group rested for a moment, leaning on their tools and gazing out over the wide black plain. The sky above them was scattered with stars, a vast dome under which their labor seemed both small and eternal. Somewhere in the distance, a signal fire burned on another peak, its light blinking faintly like an eye in the dark. As the moon climbed higher, their shadows grew sharper, stretching long and thin across the ground. Those shapes shifted with every movement, a swing of the arm, a bend at the waist, a turn of the head. The wall itself cast a shadow too, a dark band that cut across the stony ground like a scar. By the time the hour passed, the silhouettes on the ridge had changed positions, some vanishing down the slope with empty baskets, others arriving with new supplies. The rhythm of the night labor continued, the wall inching forward under the watch of stars and stone. And though the ridge was high, and the work slow, there was an unspoken bond between those shadowed figures. Their silhouettes might fade with dawn, but the wall they shaped would remain, a silhouette against history itself. The night was still but for the soft crunch of boots on dirt. At the center of the ridge, a man knelt beside a small wooden box, its lid open to reveal tools glinting in the lantern's glow. He was the engineer, a quiet presence among the laborers, more often seen measuring and marking than lifting or hauling. His work, though silent, shaped the wall's very bones. Around him, the lantern light pooled in a circle, revealing strips of parchment weighed down with stones, their surfaces covered in neat, ink-black lines. A compass, a slender brush, and a string marked with red chalk lay beside him. Every movement he made was slow and exact, as though the night itself depended on his care. He ran the chalk string between 2 points and snapped it against the earth, leaving a thin red line across the dirt. That line would become the edge of the foundation, a guide for the masons to follow when the first stones were laid. Beside him, 2 young assistants held tall measuring poles, shifting their positions at his quiet instructions. Beyond the circle of light, the shapes of the wall's incomplete segments rose against the stars. Some were just low outlines of stone, others already standing waist-high, their lines as straight as the engineer's chalk marks. The wind was soft here, brushing against the parchment with a sound like a faint whisper. Now and then, the engineer paused to listen, not to voices, but to the distant sounds of labor, the thud of a mallet, the scrape of a chisel, the soft grunt of effort. These sounds told him where progress was being made and where more hands would be needed. He adjusted his position and took a small wax tablet from his box. Using a pointed stylus, he etched notes in neat strokes, recording distances, angles, and slopes. The tablet would be carried down to the valley by morning, where other engineers would compare it with their own records, ensuring the wall's path was as unbroken and precise as the emperor had demanded. As the hours slipped past, he worked without hurry, his mind tracing the wall's course far beyond what the eye could see. To him, the stones were not yet a wall, they were lines on a map, coordinates in the vast geometry of the empire's protection. When at last he stood, lantern in hand, he surveyed the ridge with quiet satisfaction. His markings lay before him, straight as an arrow's flight. By dawn, those faint red lines would vanish beneath the first stones of a new section, but the path they set would endure for centuries. The engineer's work was invisible to most, yet it guided every hand, every hammer, every stone. In the silence of the night, under the patient watch of the moon, he left his mark not only on the earth but on the shape of history itself. The night was deep and cool, the kind that made the stars seem sharper against the blackness. All along the half-built ridge, workers moved in shadows, their shapes shifting like the silhouettes of restless spirits. For hours, the only sounds had been the scrape of stone, the muted thud of wood against earth, and the wind curling through the gaps in the wall. Then, from somewhere down the line, a voice rose. It was low at first, a hum, no more than a thread of sound winding through the quiet. Another voice joined it, matching the tone, and then another, until the hum became a melody. The words were old, older than the men who sang them, older even than the empire they built for. They spoke of mountains and rivers, of distant villages, of seasons turning like the wheel of a cart. The song was not for entertainment, it was for rhythm. As the melody swelled, the workers matched their movements to its steady beat. A group of men hauling a timber beam began to step in time, their shoulders rocking together. Masons setting stones struck their chisels to the same unhurried pulse, sparks dancing briefly before vanishing into the night. The sound carried along the wall, rolling like a wave over the dark hills. Even the guards in the watchtowers found themselves tapping their fingers against the wooden rails, their eyes still scanning the horizon but their hearts moving to the music. The song did not drown out the labor, it wrapped around it. The clink of stone, the crunch of boots, the hiss of rope through calloused hands became part of the music itself. For those working in the dark, it was a thread of connection, a reminder that they were not alone on this endless stretch of wall. Sometimes the melody slowed, dipping into a mournful minor, and the men would feel the weight of the work pressing heavier on their backs. Other times, it rose bright and defiant, as if daring the night to match their endurance. No one led the song. It moved from one worker to another like a shared breath, carried by the wind and the will to keep going. Some sang with strength, their voices ringing across the stone. Others mouthed the words in silence, saving their breath for the work. But all of them knew the tune, as if it had been born in them. By the time the moon began to lean toward the western horizon, the song had softened again to a hum. The rhythm of labor slowed with it, and the men worked now by habit more than by pace. But the echo of the melody lingered in their minds, carrying them through the final hours before dawn. In the great silence of the northern frontier, where the wall rose like a spine against the sky, the song was both shield and lantern, unseen, but guiding them just the same. The night was black as ink, the mountains swallowed in shadow. But far ahead, where the wall curved like the spine of some ancient beast, small flames flickered against the dark. They were not fires for warmth or cooking, they were guide flames, planted by the overseers to mark the night's work. Each fire burned in a carefully chosen place, its glow spilling just enough light to show the path and the next section of stone. In the distance, the points of flame looked like a scattered constellation fallen to earth, leading the laborers along the ridge. Men carrying timber could see the next fire and know where to set their burdens. Masons could gauge their pace by how quickly the next light drew near. Even the weary guards, pacing atop the unfinished wall, found comfort in the steady, unwavering glow. The flames crackled softly in the night air, the wood releasing faint whispers as it burned. Sparks lifted briefly into the darkness before vanishing like insects into the void. The smell of smoke mingled with the scent of cut timber and stone dust, a perfume that had come to mean progress. From high up in the watchtower, an overseer scanned the horizon, the guide fires winking at him like distant allies. They stood between the workers and the chaos of the night, between human hands and the unseen wilderness beyond. Beneath those steady points of light, the wall continued to grow, each stone laid under the watch of a flame. Before a stone rests in the wall, it must make its journey. It begins far away in the quarry, where the moonlight glances across raw cliffs. Workers pry the stone loose with chisels and hammers, each strike echoing through the hollow night. The newly freed blocks are hauled by rope, their rough surfaces biting at the fibers. Oxen stand waiting in the dark, their breath rising in soft clouds, their hooves shifting in the dust. The stones are loaded onto carts, the wooden wheels groaning under the weight. Slowly, the caravan moves out, torches swaying with each jolt of the uneven road. The journey is long, over ridges, through valleys, past streams whose cold waters catch the torchlight like molten silver. At every stop, the workers pause to stretch their backs, then push onward, the steady clop of hooves and the rattle of wheels keeping time. By the time the caravan reaches the wall, the night is deep and still. The stones are unloaded, their surfaces already dusted with the journey's grime. In the pale lantern glow, masons examine each block, running calloused fingers along the edges before setting them in place. Every stone carries the memory of the distance it traveled. And when it joins its brothers in the growing wall, its journey ends, but its duty begins. In the still hours between midnight and dawn, the mixing pits come alive. Workers stand ankle-deep in the cool grit of sand and lime, shoveling steadily as water is poured in. The moon hangs low, its pale light spilling across the rippling surface of the mixture. The mortar must be just right, too thin and it will not hold, too thick and it will crack. The masons, veterans of many nights, test it with a practiced eye, letting it run between their fingers, feeling for the weight and texture that means strength. Once ready, it is carried in wooden troughs to the wall's edge. There, the masons kneel, their shadows long against the stone. They spread the mortar in smooth, even layers, their trowels gliding in slow arcs. Each movement is deliberate, unhurried, as if they are painting rather than building. The smell of wet lime hangs heavy in the air, mixing with the faint scent of smoke from the watchfires. Somewhere below, a night bird calls, its cry fading into the vast emptiness of the steppe. Stone meets mortar, mortar meets stone, and the wall inches higher. By the time the moon dips behind the hills, another section has been bound together, sealed in place by the patience of hands working in the quiet dark. Tonight is different. Two teams have been working for weeks from opposite ends of a ridge, and under the stars, their walls are finally about to meet. At both ends, torches burn brighter than usual, their flames dancing wildly in the cold wind. The sound of chisels and hammers rings louder too, as if the workers are urged on by the thought of completion. The gap between the two sections narrows with each stone set in place. The masons call across to one another, their voices carrying in the stillness. When the final stone is lifted, all movement slows. It is positioned carefully, the mortar spread thick and sure. The moment it settles into place, there is no cheer, no shouting. Instead, there is a deep, quiet satisfaction, a shared knowledge that something lasting has just been made whole. The two teams stand for a moment, side by side, looking at their joined work. Then, without a word, they return to their tasks, the wall already pulling them forward to the next stretch. The wind comes suddenly, sweeping across the dark plains with a voice like low thunder. It slides over the half-built wall, tugging at the workers' robes, rattling the loose stones, and sending the guide flames bowing low. The steppe wind is no gentle breeze, it carries with it the scent of distance, of lands beyond the empire's reach. Sometimes it brings dust so fine it coats the skin like flour. Sometimes it carries the faint cry of animals, or the distant clatter of hooves that makes the guards tighten their grips on their spears. Tonight, it is only the wind itself, strong enough to make the workers lean into their steps. The torches flicker, shadows jumping wildly across the stone. And still, the wall rises, each block pressed into place despite the push of the night air. The wind will come again, in many nights to follow. And each time, the wall will meet it head-on. The valley below the wall is a great hollow, a place where sound gathers and returns. When a mason's hammer strikes stone, the valley throws the sound back, doubled and softened. The low rumble of carts, the creak of ropes, the shouts of overseers, all are caught and returned like distant memories. Sometimes the echoes make it feel as though there are more workers than there truly are, as if unseen hands labor alongside the living. In the small hours, when exhaustion dulls the senses, some even imagine hearing voices they know are not there, the whispers of those who built walls long before them. The valley is both a companion and a reminder that all sound fades eventually, and all labor becomes part of the land it shapes. In the stillest hour of the night, a messenger arrives from the capital, bringing with him a letter sealed in red. It is read aloud to the overseers by lantern light, the emperor's own words, describing his vision of a wall that never sleeps. He speaks of a barrier so strong that no enemy dare cross it, so long that it binds the mountains to the sea. And he commands that it be built without pause, day and night, until the dream is real. The workers do not hear these words directly, but they feel their weight. Orders ripple down the line like wind through grass, and the pace quickens. The wall grows under the silent pull of a dream that began far away, in the mind of one man, but now lives in the hands of thousands. There is no clear beginning or end to the night shift. It is simply one march of steps after another, boots on dirt, boots on stone, boots on the wooden planks of scaffolding. Fatigue settles into the bones, but the work does not stop. Shoulders ache, fingers blister, yet the stones keep coming. The rhythm of lifting, placing, and binding becomes mechanical, almost trance-like. The workers think of home only in brief flashes, the smell of a hearth, the laughter of a child, before the sound of the overseer's call brings them back to the wall. The march is endless, but so is their resolve. The horizon begins to pale, a thin silver line stretching across the east. The stars dim, and the guide flames seem less bright now, their work done for the night. In the growing light, the wall is revealed in full, every new stone, every fresh seam of mortar. The workers pause for a moment, leaning on their tools, letting the dawn's cool air wash over them. It is a quiet triumph, unspoken but shared. Another night's labor has become part of something far greater than any one man. Long after the workers leave, long after the guide flames die, the wall remains. In the darkness, it stands as it did in the day, unblinking, unmoving, stretching far beyond sight. It has become more than stone and mortar. It is a memory of every hand that touched it, every night spent under its shadow, every breath taken in the cold air of the frontier. For the wall, the night never truly ends. It will stand through countless moons and dawns, keeping its silent watch while the world changes around it.